The transmission appeared on every human screen at the exact same moment. Billions of people across hundreds of worlds stopped what they were doing and looked up. The face that materialized was not a face at all. It was living crystal, ancient beyond measure, glowing with cold light that seemed to judge everything it touched. Narration, first voice of the Mortani elders, had not spoken directly to any species in 3 million years. Now it spoke to humanity. You have given shelter to the Draloth. The voice echoed, somehow heard in the mind rather than the ears. This was not permitted. You will surrender them within 7 rotations. If you refuse, you will share their fate. This is not a negotiation. This is your final warning. The transmission ended. Admiral David Okonkwo watched the message replay on the command deck of the Persistence. Around him, his officers stood in silence. Some looked afraid. Others looked angry. David felt neither. He felt something simpler, clarity. Give me everything we have on the Elders, he said quietly, and contact Ambassador Reyes. We need to talk. Anna Reyes arrived within the hour. She was young for a diplomat, only 34, but she had spent the last decade studying the Elders and the galactic power structure they controlled. She knew more about them than anyone else alive. 847, she said, standing before the assembled council. That's how many species the Elders have erased since they rose to power. Not defeated, not conquered, erased. Every trace of their existence wiped from the galaxy. Their planets sterilized. Their names forgotten. And how many have successfully resisted? Asked Captain O'Yelleran, a veteran officer with gray in her hair. None. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. The Draloth were a peaceful people, Anna continued. Scientists, philosophers. They never threatened anyone. But 6 months ago, the Elders marked them for extinction. No explanation given. The survivors fled, and we took them in. 40,000 refugees. Men, women, children. David nodded slowly. And now the Elders want us to hand them over. Yes. To be killed. To be erased. Completely. As if they never existed. David looked around the room at his officers. These were good people. Brave people. They had families waiting for them back home. They had lives they wanted to live. And they were all looking at him, waiting for guidance. I want every council member to speak, David said. What do we do? The debate lasted 4 hours. Some argued for surrender. The math was simple and brutal. 40,000 Draloth lives versus billions of human lives. How could they risk extinction for refugees they barely knew? Others refused to accept that logic. If humanity surrendered innocence to genocide today, what would they surrender tomorrow? Where was the line? When did survival stop being worth it? A young Draloth woman named Tess was brought before the council. She was barely 20 years old, with silver-blue skin and eyes that had seen too much loss too quickly. I do not ask you to die for us, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. If you surrender us, I will understand. You owe us nothing, but I want you to know something. My people discovered things about the Elders, things they wanted hidden. That is why they marked us for death. Not because we were a threat, because we learned the truth about what they really are. What truth? Anna asked. Tess hesitated. They were not always gods. Once, long ago, they were mortal. Like you. Like us. What they became afterward. It came at a terrible price. A price paid by others. The council fell silent again. Finally, David stood. He was not a man who made speeches. He preferred action to words. But some moments required words. I joined the fleet because I believed in something, he said. I believed that humanity could be more than just survivors. We could be good. We could be decent. We could be the kind of people who do the right thing even when it costs us everything. He paused. If we hand over 40,000 innocent people to be slaughtered, we might survive. But we will have become something that doesn't deserve to survive. The vote was called that it was not unanimous. 32 votes to surrender. 47 votes to refuse. David sat down at the communication console himself. He typed a single word and transmitted it across all frequencies, knowing the Elders would receive it instantly. No. Across the galaxy, in a palace of crystal and shadow on a world called Vorith, Nuravin received the message. The ancient being had witnessed the birth and death of stars. It had watched civilizations rise to greatness and crumble to dust. It had delivered thousands of final warnings, and never once had a species refused. The word glowed on the screen before it. Such a small word. Such a simple word that no Nurevan felt something stir in the depths of its ancient consciousness, an emotion it had not experienced in 3 million years. It took several moments to identify. Uncertainty. The first voice rose from its throne and moved to the window overlooking the endless gardens of Vorith. Somewhere out there, a young species had just sealed its own death warrant. They had no idea what was coming for them, no idea of the power they had defied. And yet, Nurevan could not shake the feeling that something had just changed. Something small but significant. A crack in a foundation that had stood for 12 million years. The Silence Fleet would launch within the hour. 300 vessels that had never known defeat. But for the first time in longer than memory, Nurevan wondered if that would be enough. News traveled faster than light when the galaxy wanted to gossip. Within hours of humanity's refusal, every spacefaring species knew what had happened. Most thought humans were insane. Some thought they were brave. A few secretly hoped they might somehow succeed on a Telluri trading vessel far from human space. A merchant named Voss heard the news and felt something strange in his chest. He had served the elders all his life, as his father had, and his father's father, going back 80,000 years. Fear was normal. Obedience was survival. But when he heard that the humans had simply said no, he felt something he could not name. It felt almost like hope. Aboard the Persistence, Anna Reyes worked without sleep. Tez 6 sat beside her, translating fragments of ancient Drolith texts that had been smuggled off their homeworld before the end. The records were incomplete, damaged, written in a dialect that had not been spoken in 10,000 years. But slowly, piece by piece, a picture was forming. The elders were not always called elders, Tez 6 explained, her thin fingers moving across the holographic display. Once they called themselves the Mortani. They were scholars, seekers of knowledge. They lived on a single world and dreamed of understanding the universe. What changed them? Anna asked. They found something. Or perhaps they created it. The records are unclear. But it gave them immortality. It gave them power beyond imagination. And it changed them, made them into what they are now. Anna leaned forward. What was it? What did they find? Tessix's silver eyes grew sad. That part of the record is missing. Destroyed, perhaps. Or hidden. All I know is this. The immortality has a price. And they are not the ones who pay it. In the engineering bay, Ben Larson was trying to solve an impossible problem. He was a practical man, thick-armed and plain-spoken, better with machines than people. His job was to keep the fleet running. Now his job was to find some way to fight beings who had been perfecting their technology for 12 million years. We cannot match them, said his assistant, a nervous young woman named Priya. Their weapons operate on principles we do not even have names for. Their shields can withstand the output of a star. What can we possibly do? Ben scratched his beard and stared at the schematics floating before him. We cannot beat them in a straight fight. That is true. But maybe we do not need to. What do you mean? Every system has weaknesses. Every technology has blind spots. The elders have been unchallenged for millions of years. They have never needed to adapt, never needed to innovate. They have forgotten what it is like to face an enemy who fights differently. He pulled up an old file, something he had been tinkering with for years. Their ships communicate using a specific frequency. Ancient, unchanged since before humanity existed. What if we could disrupt it? Would that even matter? Maybe not, but it is a start. Admiral Okonkwo stood in the refugee camp on the lower decks, surrounded by Drolith families. Children played between the temporary shelters, their laughter strange and beautiful in a place preparing for war. Parents watched him with eyes that held no hope. Only resignation. An elderly Drolith approached him. Her name was Senna, and she had been a teacher before her world died. You should not have refused them, she said quietly. Your people will suffer because of us. David knelt so he could meet her eyes. We made a choice. The right choice. Whatever happens next, that does not change. You do not know what they are capable of. No, he admitted. But I know what we are capable of. And I know that if we surrender you, we become something worse than dead. We become the kind of people who deserve to lose. Senna studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand. I had forgotten, she whispered, that the galaxy still had people like you. Far away, on the world called Vorith, the Silence Fleet was preparing to launch. 300 vessels, each one larger than a human city, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets like eggs. They hung in orbit like patient predators, waiting for the command. Nuravin watched them from the crystal spire at the heart of the Elder Citadel. The other elders had gathered, 7 ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy together since before most stars were born. "This is unprecedented," said second voice Korath, its form flickering between states of matter. "A species refusing directly. It has not happened since the Ven, and that was 3 million years ago. The Ven were destroyed in 17 rotations," Nuravin replied. "This will take less." "Then why do you hesitate?" Nuravin did not answer immediately. The truth was complicated. The humans were nothing. Their technology was primitive, their numbers small, their history barely a heartbeat in cosmic terms. And yet something about their refusal disturbed the first voice. Not the defiance itself, but the way they had done it. No fear in their transmission. No desperate plea for mercy. Just that single word, delivered with absolute certainty to no.as if they believed they had the right to refuse. "I do not hesitate," Nuravin said finally. "I merely reflect. Launch the fleet." The Silence fleet began to move. 300 vessels sliding through the darkness between stars, carrying death toward a species that had dared to say the word no civilization was supposed to say. Behind them, unnoticed, a single Telluri trading vessel changed its course. Then another. Then a dozen more. Something was stirring in the galaxy. Something that had been asleep for a very long time. And it was starting to wake up. 18 hours. That was how long humanity had left to exist, according to every calculation. The Silence fleet moved through space like a slow tide of death, unstoppable and absolute. Sensors across human territory tracked its approach with grim precision. In the command center of the Persistence, David Okonkwo studied the tactical display and made his decision. "We do not fight them directly," he announced. "We cannot win that way, and dying uselessly helps no one. Our job is to buy time." "Time for what?" asked Captain O'Yellerin. "For our people to escape, for the civilians to reach the hidden colonies, and for Anna to finish her research." He turned to face his officers. "The elders expect us to line up and die like every species before us. We are going to do something different. We are going to survive." The plan was desperate but simple. Human ships would not engage the Silence fleet in battle. Instead, they would scatter, harass, delay. Defense stations would sacrifice themselves to slow the enemy advance. Civilian ships would flee to secret locations that even most military officers did not know about. It was not a strategy for victory. It was a strategy for not losing everything. Deep in the refugee section of the ship, Anna Reyes finally cracked the last fragment of the Drolith records. Her hands trembled as she read the ancient words. "Test 6, she breathed. "I understand now. I understand what they are." The young Drolith woman leaned close, her silver eyes wide. "Tell me." "The elders achieved immortality, but not through natural means. They built something called the resonance engine. It harvests psychic energy from mass extinction events. Every species they destroy feeds the engine. Feeds them." Anna's voice shook with horror and rage. "They are not punishing disobedience. They are feeding. Every few thousand years, they need to destroy a civilization just to stay alive." Test 6 closed her eyes. "My people discovered this. That is why they marked us." "Yes, and there is more." Anna pulled up the final translation. "The elders' power is partially sustained by belief. The fear and worship of other species strengthens them. They have spent millions of years making themselves into gods in the minds of the galaxy. But it works both ways. If species stopped fearing them, stopped believing in their invincibility, they would weaken." "Exactly. And that is why they have erased every species that ever defied them. Not just as punishment. Because defiance itself threatens them. It proves they can be challenged. It gives others hope." In the engineering bay, Ben Larson finished the final calibrations on his disruption device. It was an ugly thing, cobbled together from spare parts and desperate mathematics. He had no idea if it would work. "This will broadcast on the Elder communication frequency," he explained to David, who had come to inspect the device personally. "It should interfere with their coordination. Maybe confuse them. Maybe do nothing at all. Will it hurt them? I do not know. But it might make them feel something they have not felt in a long time." Doubt. The first engagement came at the Helix Passage, a narrow corridor of stable space between 2 unstable nebulae. The Silence fleet had to pass through it. Human defense stations waited for them, There was no real battle. The Elder weapons fired once, and the stations ceased to exist. But they bought 3 hours. 3 hours for civilian ships to flee. 3 hours for the plan to advance. As the Silence Fleet emerged from the Helix Passage, Lieutenant Grace O'Yelleran, daughter of Captain O'Yelleran, commanded a small patrol vessel named Defiant. Her ship had taken heavy damage. Her engines were failing. She had 2 choices: abandon ship or keep fighting. She chose to fight. Her vessel accelerated toward the nearest Elder Command ship. She knew she could not damage it. She knew this was the end. But she also knew that the galaxy was watching. Every species with any kind of sensor array was tracking this battle, waiting to see how humans died. She opened a channel that broadcast on every frequency. This is Lieutenant Grace O'Yelleran of the human vessel Defiant. I want you to remember something. Remember that we did not beg. We did not surrender. We did not break. Her ship struck the Elder vessel and detonated. The Elder ship was undamaged. Of course it was. But something happened that the Elders did not expect. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived in fear for thousands of years heard those words. We did not break, and they felt something stir inside them. At that moment, Ben activated the disruption field. The effect was invisible but immediate. Elder ships that had moved in perfect coordination for millions of years suddenly hesitated. Communication between them flickered and failed. For 5 minutes, each vessel was alone, unable to hear the others. On his command ship, Nuravin felt something impossible. A moment of silence where the voices of his fellow Elders should have been. A moment of isolation after millions of years of perfect communion, and beneath that, something worse. A flicker of weakness. A tiny fracture in the immortality that had sustained him since before humanity's ancestors had crawled from the oceans of Earth. The disruption field faded. Communication returned. But the damage was done. For the first time in 12 million years, Nuravin felt mortal. And across the galaxy, other species began to wonder if the impossible might actually be possible. The Silence Fleet stopped moving. For 6 hours, 300 Elder vessels hung motionless in space, neither advancing nor retreating. Across the galaxy, observers watched in confusion. The Elders never hesitated. The Elders never paused. Something was wrong. Inside the fleet's command vessel, the Eternal Silence, Nuravin struggled to understand what had happened. The disruption field had lasted only minutes, but its effects lingered. The perfect unity that had bound the Elders together for millions of years felt cracked. Not broken, but damaged in a way that should have been impossible. What did they do to us? Demanded second voice Korath. What kind of weapon was that? It was not a weapon, Nuravin replied slowly. It was a mirror. They showed us what we have forgotten. What it feels like to be alone. We are never alone. We are eternal. We are beyond such things. But Nuravin could feel it now, the truth hiding beneath the surface of their existence. The immortality was not absolute. It had never been absolute. It required maintenance, feeding, belief. And for the first time in longer than memory, someone had refused to believe that on the persistence. Ana Reyes prepared to present her findings to the full council. The room was crowded with officers, scientists, and representatives from the refugee population. Tez 6 stood beside her, ready to confirm the ancient records. The Elders are parasites, Ana began. Her voice was steady despite the enormity of what she was saying. Their immortality comes from something they call the resonance engine. It harvests psychic energy from mass death, specifically from the extinction of intelligent species. Every time they destroy a civilization, they feed. Murmurs filled the room. Admiral Okonkwo raised a hand for silence. How often do they need to feed? Based on the records, approximately every 3,000 to 4,000 years. The Drolith were next in line. When they discovered the truth, the Elders accelerated the timeline. And the belief component you mentioned. Ana nodded. This is the part that matters most. The Elders' power is not purely technological. It has a psychological element. The fear and worship of other species strengthens them. They have spent millions of years cultivating an image of absolute, godlike authority. Every species that bows to them, that trembles before them, that prays to them for mercy, makes them stronger. And defiance weakens them, David said quietly. Yes, real defiance. Not just words, but genuine refusal to fear them. The Drolith discovered this too. They theorized that if enough species stopped believing in Elder invincibility, the elders would begin to weaken physically. Anna paused. We are testing that theory right now. Lieutenant O'Yelloran's final transmission, the disruption field, our refusal to surrender. These things are hurting them. Captain O'Yelloran, who had lost her daughter just hours before, stood slowly. Her face was carved from stone. My grace died for this. Your grace may have done more damage to the elders than any weapon we possess, Anna replied gently. She showed the galaxy that humans can face death without fear. That broadcast was seen by billions of beings, and every single one of them who believed her, even for a moment, weakened the elders a little bit more. The room fell silent. 3 hours later, a request came through on a secured channel. Nurevan wanted to speak with Admiral Okonkwo directly. The meeting happened via hologram, two figures facing each other across the impossible distance of space. Nurevan appeared as it always did, a towering form of living crystal, ancient and terrible. But David noticed something different. A slight flicker in the light, a tiny imperfection that had not been there before. You are making a mistake, Nurevan said. Its voice still echoed in the mind, but there was something beneath the power, something uncertain. I do not think so. I have lived for 12 million years. I have seen species like yours before. Defiant, brave, foolish. They all ended the same way. You will be no different. David shook his head slowly. You have never seen anything like us. Because we are not defying you to survive. We are defying you because it is right. Because surrendering innocence to genocide is wrong. Because fear is not a good enough reason to abandon our principles. Nurevan was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was strange, almost soft. You genuinely believe that? Yes. You genuinely do not fear us. I fear what you can do to us. But I do not fear you. There is a difference. Another silence. Longer this time. I will offer you a compromise, Nurevan said finally. Surrender half the Drolith refugees. We will spare the rest, and we will spare your species. You can call it a victory. You can tell yourselves you saved some of them. David did not hesitate. No. You would rather die than compromise. I would rather die than become you. David leaned forward, his old eyes meeting the ancient crystal gaze without flinching. I know what you are now. Parasites. You feed on death and fear. You have built your entire existence on the suffering of others. And that means you can be beaten. Not with weapons. With courage. With defiance. With hope. For the first time in 3 million years, Nurevan had nothing to say. One more thing, David added. This conversation is being broadcast to every species in the galaxy. They know now. They all know what you really are. The hologram flickered and died in the hours that followed. Something remarkable began to happen. Across the galaxy, species that had served the elders in trembling obedience for thousands of years started asking questions, whispering to each other, wondering, what if the humans were right? What if the elders could fall? It began with a single Telluri vessel refusing to transport supplies for the Elder fleet. Then another. Then 100. Within a day, the entire Telluri merchant network had quietly stopped cooperating. They did not announce rebellion. They simply stopped moving, stopped obeying, stopped fearing. Voss, the merchant who had felt hope when he heard of humanity's refusal, stood on the deck of his ship and watched Elder vessels pass by without the fuel and supplies they needed. What are you doing? His first officer asked, terrified. They will destroy us. Perhaps, Voss replied, but perhaps not. The humans have proven something. The elders can be denied, and every time someone denies them, they grow a little weaker. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The Renari stopped sending tribute. The Hollow Ones withdrew their diplomatic representatives from Elder space. A species called the Keen, who had served the elders since before humanity existed, transmitted a single word on all frequencies. No on the persistence. Anna watched the reports flooding in with tears in her eyes. It's happening, she whispered. It's actually happening. David put a hand on her shoulder. They were waiting for someone to go first. They just needed to see that it was possible. What do we do now? Now we give them something to rally around. The message went out within the hour. All species willing to stand against the elders were invited to a gathering point at the Varys Nebula. Humanity would be there. Others could choose to join them. The elders responded by attacking 3 Telluri worlds simultaneously. Millions died in hours. The message was clear. Defiance would be punished. But instead of crushing the rebellion, the attack strengthened it. Species that had been uncertain were pushed toward action. The Telluri, instead of surrendering, committed their remaining fleet to the coalition. Others followed. Ships of all shapes and sizes began converging on Veres Nebula. Ben Larson worked without sleep for 3 days straight. Engineers from 7 different species crowded into his workshop, contributing ideas and technology. Together, they built something none of them could have managed alone, an amplified version of the disruption field, powerful enough to affect the entire Elder fleet. Will it work? David asked when Ben presented the finished device. Maybe. Probably. It depends on how much the Elders have already weakened. Ben rubbed his exhausted eyes. There is something else. The Drolith records mention the location of the resonance engine, the thing that gives the Elders their immortality. It is on their homeworld, Vorith. If we destroy it, they die. 12 million years of stolen time catches up with them all at once. David absorbed this information slowly. Can we reach Vorith? Not easily. But if we can break through their fleet, if we can buy enough time for a strike team to land. Ben shrugged. It is possible. Barely. While humanity prepared for battle, Nurevan did something unprecedented. The first voice sought out Anna Reyes for a private conversation. The hologram appeared in Anna's quarters without warning. She reached for a weapon before realizing it would be useless. I did not come to threaten you, Nurevan said. Its voice was different now. Smaller. Almost tired. Then why are you here? Because I remember. The ancient being flickered slightly. The others have forgotten. They have been Elders for so long that they cannot remember being anything else. But I was the first. I remember what we were before. What we chose to become. And I remember why. Anna lowered her weapon slowly. Tell me. We were afraid. Nurevan said simply. Mortality terrified us. We sought immortality so desperately that we were willing to do anything to achieve it. When we discovered the resonance engine, we knew the price. We chose to pay it anyway. And every choice after that has been about justifying the first one. Why are you telling me this? Because I watched your admiral refuse my offer. I watched him choose death over compromise. And I felt something I had not felt in millions of years. Nurevan's crystalline form seemed to dim. Shame. I felt shame. Anna stared at the ancient being. It is not too late. You could help us. Perhaps. The engine is the source of everything. Without it, we would die. All of us. Nurevan paused. But perhaps death is what we deserve. The battle at Veres Nebula came 3 days later. A coalition fleet of 400 ships, thrown together from a dozen species, faced 3 Elder vessels that had been sent to crush the rebellion. By every reasonable calculation, the coalition should have lost. They did not lose. The amplified disruption field cut Elder communications at the critical moment. Coalition ships used tactics the Elders had never encountered, because the Elders had never faced a coordinated multi-species force before. And something else happened, something harder to measure. The coalition believed they could win. They fought with hope instead of despair. And that belief, that hope, weakened the Elders more than any weapon. 2 Elder vessels were destroyed. The third retreated. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived in fear for millennia heard the news and understood its meaning. The gods could bleed, the gods could fall. That night, a message arrived at the Persistence from an encrypted source. It contained coordinates for a hidden passage to Vorith and detailed plans of the Elder Citadel. The sender was Nurevan. The final battle was about to begin. Vorith had never been seen by outside eyes. For 12 million years, the Elder homeworld had remained hidden, protected, sacred. Now a fleet of mixed ships emerged from hyperspace above its crystal spires and endless gardens, and the galaxy held its breath. David Okonkwo commanded from the Persistence as the orbital assault began. The remaining Elders threw everything they had at the coalition, but their power was fading. Too many species had stopped believing. Too many had chosen hope over fear. The immortals were dying slowly, and they knew it. Ground team is ready. Ben Larson reported from the shuttle bay. Anna Reyes stood beside him, along with Test 6 and a strike force of volunteers from 6 different species. Get to the engine, David ordered. We will hold them off as long as we can. The shuttle dropped toward Vorth's surface. They landed in a courtyard of perfect crystal, surrounded by architecture that had stood unchanged since before humanity existed. Nurevan waited for them there, alone, diminished. This way, the first voice said. There is not much time. They moved through corridors that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The walls whispered with the echoes of forgotten civilizations. Anna felt the weight of ages pressing down on her, the accumulated grief of 847 extinct species. The resonance engine sat at the heart of the citadel. It was smaller than Anna had expected, a sphere of swirling darkness no larger than a human torso. But when she looked at it, she could see shapes moving inside. Faces, millions of faces, crying out in silent agony. The souls of every species we destroyed, Nurevan said quietly. Trapped forever. Feeding us. Tess 6 fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her silver face. My people are in there. My family. We can destroy it, Ben said, raising his weapon. End this forever. Wait. Anna held up her hand. If we just destroy it, the energy might be released violently. It could damage everything, including us, including the galaxy. There has to be another way. Ben looked at his equipment, running calculations in his head. We could transform it instead. Reverse the flow. Release the trapped energy back into the galaxy gradually. Let the souls pass on peacefully instead of being destroyed. Can you do that? Maybe. If someone helps stabilize the field from inside. Ben looked at Nurevan. The ancient elder understood immediately. You want me to enter the engine? To become part of the release? You would die, Anna said. You would finally die. Nurevan was silent for a long moment. The crystal form flickered and faded, showing glimpses of something beneath. Something that had once been mortal. Something that remembered fear and love and hope. I have lived for 12 million years, Nurevan said finally. I have done terrible things. I have destroyed civilizations, murdered billions, fed on suffering. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself we had no choice. But there is always a choice. Your admiral taught me that. The first voice moved toward the engine. For 12 million years, I chose wrong. Let me choose right, just once at the end. Nurevan touched the engine and was pulled inside. For one terrible moment, the darkness expanded, swallowing everything. Anna felt the screaming of a million souls rushing past her. She felt the weight of genocide, of extinction, of loss beyond comprehension. Then the darkness began to glow. The trapped energy poured outward, not as destruction but as release. The souls of the dead did not explode. They ascended. They remembered themselves, remembered their cultures and their dreams and their loves, and then they let go. Peacefully, gratefully, finally free. Tess 6 felt her ancestors pass through her. She felt their pride, their love, their joy at knowing their sacrifice had not been permanent. Then they were gone, and she was kneeling in a chamber of ordinary crystal, crying with grief and relief. Above Vorith, the elder fleet ceased to exist. 12 million years caught up with the remaining elders in a single moment. Their crystal forms cracked, aged, crumbled. Their ships fell silent. Their power faded like morning mist. It was over 1 year later. The galaxy was a different place. The old order had collapsed. Species that had lived in fear for thousands of years were learning to govern themselves, to make their own choices, to hope without permission. It was messy. There were conflicts, disagreements, growing pains. Freedom was harder than servitude, but it was real. Admiral David Okonkwo retired to teach at a new academy on a station called Unity. Humans and aliens learned together there, studying history and philosophy and the arts of peace. Anna Reyes became an ambassador, traveling between species that had never spoken before, helping them find common ground. Ben Larson returned to engineering, building things instead of weapons. His latest project was a memorial station at the coordinates where Vorith had been. Tess 6 became a teacher, preserving the knowledge of her lost people, sharing their wisdom with a galaxy that had finally learned to listen. The memorial was unveiled on the first anniversary of Liberation Day. It was not a monument to victory. It was a garden, growing in the void of space, filled with plants from every species that had ever fallen to the elders. In the center stood a simple stone with words carved in 100 languages. They chose fear. We chose differently. A young Telluri child visited the memorial with her parents. She looked at the words, struggling to understand them. Why do we celebrate this day? She asked. Her mother knelt beside her, pointing at the garden, at the stars, at the diverse faces of the beings walking among the memorial's paths. Because once, long ago, a young species taught the galaxy something important. They taught us that fear is a choice. They taught us that the powerful can be defied. They taught us that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs everything. Did they win? Her mother smiled and gestured at the living, breathing, hoping galaxy around them. We all won. Far away, in the quiet of deep space, a fragment of crystal drifted. It was the last remnant of Nurevan, the first voice, the eldest of the elders. It would drift for billions of years, a silent witness to the ages. But if anyone had been close enough to see, they might have noticed something unusual. The crystal was no longer cold. It held, within its ancient structure, something that felt remarkably like peace. And somewhere, in the great beyond where freed souls find their rest, 12 million years of regret finally found something like forgiveness. The galaxy moved on. The story continued. And humanity, that strange young species from a small blue world, had become something they never expected they had. Become hope.